I'm Emily Mashak, and I'm here today for Town Square Media's Tuned In to NoCo, the show that clues you in on what matters in NoCo. I'm sitting down today with Dorothy Farrel, the Executive Director of SAVA, the Sexual Assault Victim Advocate Center. So welcome today, Dorothy.
Thank you. Hi, Emily.
In a nutshell, can you tell me what is SAVA? What does the organization do for Northern Colorado?
Sure. Well, we are considered Northern Colorado's Rape Crisis Center. So we have three primary programs. We have an outreach and advocacy program. We have counseling for ages 3 and up, and we have a prevention program where we go into the schools and talk to kids within middle school, high school about consent and sexual violence.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there does seem to be a bit of confusion about what classifies as a sexual assault or sexual harassment. How does SAVA define sexual assault?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's a spectrum, right, of different kind of things that occur. Basically, anything that happens to somebody that occurs without consent, that is threatening to them, that doesn't make them feel safe. It could be anything from a slap on the butt when you're walking down the hallway in school to sexting. A lot of the kids get in trouble with sexting. There's a lot of laws that they need to be aware of as far as their rights and the dangers of sexting. What seems to be innocent with social media really isn't, all the way up to full-blown rape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's everything in between.
It's kind of nitty-gritty, but how can you determine, especially with social media, when it goes too far, especially if kids start out as consensual and then get uncomfortable? How can they recognize that line and when things are not okay?
We find that kids have a really hard time understanding what consent is, right? We're being raised in society where they're not told no very often. So defining what consensual relationships look like is very confusing for especially young people. And in particular, when alcohol or substances are involved, then it becomes even more complicated because people's senses, as we all know, go down and aren't exactly acute. So how we define that, and legally, truly, it's when something happens to somebody when they say no. And so how I always explain it is I could be naked in your bed at a bar and thinking that we're going to have sex, but I could still change my mind and say no. And if that person chooses to violate me, then that would be not consensual.
Mm-hmm. How much of an issue is sexual assault in Colorado or Northern Colorado specifically?
Yeah, unfortunately, we have very significant high numbers. Statistically, there's some statistics that show every 92 seconds an individual is sexually assaulted. That equates in Colorado to 1 out of 3 women and 1 out of 6 men. 1 out of 2 transgendered individuals will be assaulted in their lifetime. I just read some research. We have some issues with our young people. And so there was a report by Colorado Department of Health Services that came out in 2018. 1 out of 10 kids before the age of 18 will become victims of sexual assault.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was reading on your website about the various myths and facts about sexual assault. Can you break down a few of those things for me here?
Well, some facts are that it happens, and it happens often here in Northern Colorado. Some other facts are just the statistics. 48% of women that are sexually assaulted will occur before the age of 18. Another myth is that men can't be sexually assaulted. And so if we talk about men for a moment, we estimate that 1 out of 6 men are assaulted, but we approximate that number is probably a lot higher. They just don't talk about it. And so there's a myth surrounding that. Well, how can men be assaulted? And so that myth is often talked about. And just like females, without consent, men can be violated and abused as children and even as adults. Some really popular myths when it comes to sexual assault overall is that women ask for it or men ask for it. So if we walk into a bar with clothing that might be suggestive, or again, if we go home with somebody, or if we flirt at a bar, or if we say something that might be insinuating, that the myth is that women ask for it in particular. And of course, the fact is that nobody ever asks to be assaulted. And so we really have to define that even if somebody walks into the bar and people assume that they are flirting or agreeable to having sexual relationships with somebody, that at any point somebody has a right to say no.
What is it like for someone who experiences assault? Can you tell me a little bit about the toll it takes on them and the aftermath that they might feel if this has happened?
Yeah. The statistics are really horrible for individuals that are sexually assaulted. The one that comes to the top of my mind are rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. So typically when somebody is assaulted, they have this sense of loss of control. And throughout their life, they will have what we call triggers. So they may hear a song, they may smell something, they may walk across the street to the bar where they met the individual that ended up assaulting them. But 85% of individuals that are sexually assaulted will end up with some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Depression is another really significant, impactful factor for people that are sexually assaulted. They are 3 times more likely to experience depression in their lifetime after an assault. And statistics are also very high for individuals with suicidal ideation attempts and actually people being successful in committing a suicide. They're 33% more likely to attempt or succeed in suicide after an assault.
Mm-hmm. If you have not been sexually assaulted, but you start to recognize these symptoms in a friend or a family member, how would you go about that and addressing it?
Yeah, I think that, this goes back to the myths and the facts. And so what is really misunderstood, I think, is for adults, that is not a mandated report. So at any time, anybody can call SAVA or some of the other hotlines to just talk to somebody. Of course, if it's somebody that's under the age of 18, then we're mandated to report it, so we have to report that to the police. But if it's somebody that's over the age of 18, that they can call and just receive support, we have a 24-hour hotline. So if you are a friend recognizing that somebody might be in an abusive relationship, whether it be sexual assault or another kind of violence, just to simply ask them if they're safe. Sometimes when somebody takes a moment to recognize and actually ask that question, it can mean the world to the person sitting in front of you, because you're recognizing that something is off or maybe a little bit different. I think another myth is that we encourage people, if they feel safe doing it, going and getting a sexual assault nursing exam, and that's to collect any kind of evidence after the rape or assault. And it's also a way to make sure, it kind of gives a peace of mind for somebody. So to make sure that, they can make sure that they are tested for STDs, for pregnancies, and all sorts of other things that they may be worried about as a result of the assault. And as a result of the same doesn't necessarily mean that the police are contacted. Again, if it's an adult, that's an option for a person. They don't have to report. And one of the facts is that only 87% of people never report the assault. And so there's a large population of people that keep it to themselves, or really just don't ever tell anybody.
This is kind of going along those same lines, but if you or someone else has been sexually assaulted, what are the steps they should take, and how can SAVA specifically help?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's different for everybody. Some people will never say anything ever their entire life. Other people will find one close friend and talk to them about it and find the support. Other individuals will go to the hospital. Others will go to the police department. So it's a different journey for everybody. And as we see in the media, there's some people that won't talk about it for 30 years, and then something will happen. They're triggered. Something happens with their family members. I worked with an individual a couple months ago where they were at a family event and they were triggered because they were assaulted and abused by a family member when they were a child. They didn't talk about it for 25 years to anybody. And then they finally decided that they needed to talk to somebody, that they needed to work through some of that trauma, because trauma is not something that really ever goes away unless you work through it. So we encourage people, to do what's best for them. Rather it be police, or, report to the police or go to the hospital or not talk about it. We're here to support any of those things on that spectrum of care. SAVA in particular, there's many things that we can do. Again, we have a 24-hour hotline that is free of charge. We have staff and volunteers that are on it. at all times just to listen and provide support and resources for individuals. Also family members. We get a lot of phone calls from parents, from friends, from significant others, of people that are concerned about their loved ones that might be assaulted. We also have 3 offices, one in Loveland, one in Fort Collins, and one in Greeley. And people walk in. You can walk in at any time to talk to somebody between 8:30 and 5, Monday through Friday. So that's another option. If the phone isn't something people are comfortable with, people are more than welcome to walk in at any time. We have advocates that are there waiting to talk to whoever it is that needs some support. And then also we have counseling. So anybody that's interested in doing some work on their trauma, we do intakes for individuals. We don't want any financial barriers to be for counseling, so we do it on a sliding scale for individuals to make sure that there's no barriers to obtaining any kind of assistance.
Mm-hmm. It's awesome that you have so much support. Can you tell me a little bit more about the different services that SAVA offers for their clients?
Yeah. In 2018, we actually provided what we call direct services to 1,168 individuals.
Wow.
And so far this year, we have served over 1,200 people. So we've served more so far in 2019 than we did for the entire year of 2018. So when people think that it doesn't happen here, again, that's something that's a myth, because it's sadly happening all too often in northern Colorado. So for those individuals, that includes our 24-hour hotline. That's an advocate that will go to, we're called to all the SANE exams. So anytime anybody goes to the hospital, we're called to the police stations. We actually go to court with individuals if they decide to press charges and it goes through the court system. Our advocates will go and sit with individuals through that entire process to provide that support. We provide them with assistance in obtaining any kind of financial support that they could, as a victim. There's some victim services to support individuals. We do therapy, and that is for 3 and up. So we have what's called play therapy for the littlest of victims, for 3 to 18. And so we actually have a room where they go and do play therapy. We see a significant amount of teenagers in our program as well. About 18% of our clients last year were under the age of 18. We also do groups for teenagers and for women in particular. We're going to be starting a men's group here pretty soon to address people that want to have group therapy. And the last program that we have, which is my favorite, is our prevention program, and that's because we're trying to do something about it on the other end of it to prevent it from happening in the first place. So we have 3 different programs. One is in the middle school, so we go into our local middle schools and do a curriculum throughout the year and talking about things such as consent, about healthy relationships, about bullying at that stage, about what harassment looks like. And then we also talk about assault and what that looks like, because a lot of kids have never had the opportunity to talk to anybody about that. The high school program, we have what's called a Start Peers program, which is super cool. We go in and we train a group of juniors or seniors on an all-day 8-hour training, and then those kids go in and they do a peer education model. So they go into all the health classes throughout Poudre School District, and they teach the 9th and 10th graders about consent and what that looks like. And what's cool about that is it's the kids that are teaching it rather than the adults, right? Mm-hmm. So they're much more responsive to that program.
So education is really one of the keys to prevention.
Absolutely. Yes. And then anytime we have an opportunity to go and do any kind of outreach education, we do lots of public events, public speaking, making sure that people have resources and that we know that we're available to help them.
How can people volunteer or donate to SAVA if they want to help this cause?
Great question. We are a nonprofit, right? So and we're growing. We just opened up our 3rd office in Loveland. So we do have need for donations. Volunteers are something that we really depend on. Our volunteers, we depend on for our hotline. So they go through an extensive 40-hour training to become hotline volunteers. We also have event volunteers. So anytime we go and do booths or provide any kind of presentations out in the community, we also use volunteers. And then our prevention programs, we have adults that go in and provide support to the kids within the school prevention programs.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me today, Dorothy. It was wonderful to learn about everything that SAVA can do to help the Northern Colorado community.
Thank you so much.
Again, that was Dorothy Farrel, the Executive Director of SAVA, the Sexual Assault Victim Advocate Center. If you feel that you are in need of SAVA services, visit savacenter.org or call the 24-hour Rape Crisis Hotline at 970-472-4200.